And we are live with another beautiful episode of Catholic Faith Forum, your number one show where we discuss matters bordering on faith, morals, and popular culture. Today, we are talking about masculinity. There seems to be an agenda, these days against masculinity. And on second glance, you may find out that there are some arguments that support it. Today on the show, my guest and I will be looking at some of these issues and trying to better understand what modern times demand of us men. When we come back from this short break, we'll be meeting our guests and we'll be going straight into the discussion. In case you don't already know, my name is Chima and this is Catholic Faith Forum. Welcome back to the show. My name is Chima and this is Catholic Faith Forum. On today's episode of the show, we are discussing masculinity with a friend of the show. He is Chris Abojei, a clinical psychologist. You're welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
Yeah, we're very grateful to have you back on the show.
It's a pleasure.
All right, so today we're talking about masculinity. Yeah, there's a lot of things going on these days. When people mention masculinity, the word always seems to want to trigger people. So just tell us, what is masculinity?
Well, I think I would look at masculinity from a perspective that describes traits and characteristics that generally describe gender roles and the male gender role. So masculinity from that perspective just talks about anything that describes the male gender role. In this sense, this is mostly determined by culture, religion, and maybe political views generally. And this is also different from biological factors like the male reproductive system and the likes.
Okay, so judging from your definition, what then is not masculinity?
This is very dicey, because when you look at masculinity and femininity, it's usually on a dimension or a spectrum. And so it's defined by the culture of the people. So usually the culture, the religion tells people what that is. So for example, in a culture where they believe that masculinity is associated with strength, with bravery, with courage, then that's what it is. They define that. In another culture where masculinity has to do with protecting the clan, for example, then that becomes it. So it's not a cast in stone concept, right? Because it's a concept that is determined by the culture and the religion of the people or the political views of the people.
Don't you think masculinity, boiling down to people's definition of it, could make the actual, the way people have come to see masculinity, don't you think it could take away the whole essence of it?
Yes, you're correct. So over the years, the conflict that we've had with masculinity actually is well described by your concern, which is the fact that because there's no concrete definition of it, is determined by the majority of the people. So for example, if in a certain group of people, you have majority portray masculinity as a concept or an idea of strength, for example, that becomes what it is. And so you then find that there's going to be a lot of resistance with anything that contradicts those opinions or that opinion. And so, yes, there's a lot of conflict around what is masculinity, what should be masculinity, or what is not masculinity.
Okay, so looking at this scenario now, what do you think females can ascribe themselves to be masculine in any way?
Yes. So again, if you look at what I said earlier, that when you look at masculinity and femininity, it's usually on a spectrum, right? A lot of people think that they are opposing spectrum, but I disagree. I disagree because even when you look at the biological traits that could predispose masculinity, for example, take for example the male gender, right? The biological traits of the male gender, you would still see that hormones are key factors in determining that characteristics, and men also have female hormones. Right? The same thing goes with the females. Females also have male hormones. And so if that plays a significant role in masculinity or femininity, that also tells you that there's also the tendency that females would express masculine traits and also the tendency that males would express feminine traits.
Okay, but from what I'm understanding from your definition so far, it feels a lot more like something that has to do with biology. But what do you think about how it is defined basically by the church that masculinity has to do with a person who is first a male, biologically, who has to be a protector, who has to be selfless, and who has to have virtue. How do you think that this fits into our society today?
So I think the first thing I would say is that what biology does is that biology sets the tone, right? Biology doesn't necessarily determine what it would be. It just sets the tone. So it gives us the foundation. So for example, you find out that the physical makeup of the male gender is a lot different from that of the female gender. And that's just the tone. And then the society then steps in to determine how that is formed or how that is translated. So I don't necessarily see a conflict with the church's opinion and what we find in reality. I don't see a conflict. Why? Because every person should have a touch of the other, right? And that's what makes you complete. So if you're male, you should have a touch of the female traits. You know, if you're female, you should also have a touch of the male traits as well. Not just because it's determined by biology, but because that's what makes you complete generally. Now, I think the difference for us is then in to what extent do you express the other traits? And so you would see that in certain culture and certain beliefs and certain opinions, when a male begins to express more feminine traits, people tend to, show a bit of resistance. It's strange because it's not expected. And the same thing would go with females expressing more male traits in that regard.
Interesting. Hold that thought for a while. When we come back from this short break, we'll be going into another segment of the show where we'll be talking about some of these, arguments for and against masculinity. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show. We've been discussing masculinity with Chris Abojei, a clinical psychologist, and he has shared so many interesting opinions, so many interesting thoughts on the issue so far. Now we're going to be looking at some of the, agenda that has been flying around these days about masculinity. We're going to start with, the popular one, the buzzword, toxic masculinity. People have different opinions, different agendas about it. Some of them rooted in the fact that they don't want males to express feminine side and all of that. But what is toxic masculinity?
So I think to respond to that, I would say that you'd see a lot of people, and this applies to almost every concept, right? When people don't understand what that concept really is, there's a bit of misunderstanding that then leads to stereotypical responses. And that's how I would look at it. When it comes to toxic masculinity, it's the opinion that certain people or certain gender frown against anything that makes them appear feminine, for example, or makes them appear different from what is intended. And like I say, I think that's from the place of the lack of understanding, right? The lack of understanding of what this is. Because if you don't understand it, you would fear it. And if you fear it, of course, there will be a lot of stigma associated with it. When you look at us as a people, what you see is, and when you try to study culture, what we've done over the years is that we've tried to defend what we think is our culture, what we think is our perspective. And that's because of the fear that if other cultures or other beliefs tend to come in, it's likely to infiltrate and then take control. And that's what you've seen over the years, people trying to protect their culture and that way exerting too much of it. And then, of course, pushing people off the edge as well.
All right. So what is your, general critique of all of these arguments surrounding toxic masculinity?
I think my general opinion about it is, first, we must come to a point as a people where we're open to self-awareness, right? We're open to becoming aware of ourselves. You mentioned Jesus, and I think that the difference between Jesus and maybe some people who have come up with that concept of toxic masculinity is the lack of understanding, the lack of self-awareness. Not many people, not many persons are in touch with themselves. And so because we're not in touch with ourselves, we seem not to understand how these things work, right? And so in a bid to appear or present ourselves in a certain, appearance, either as tough, as protective, as courageous, we miss the true essence of being human. Right? And then you talked about vulnerability. I think that's also part of the essence of being human. The fact that you can be vulnerable. I always say, talking about emotions, which is also something associated with toxic masculinity, men are not expected to express emotions. If a man cries, then he's not a man. So if a boy, growing up acts in a certain way, they are telling him, oh, man up, you are a man, you shouldn't do this. So you're a man, you shouldn't do this. And they give them all those stereotypical beliefs or concepts that they should fit into. What Jesus did and what other people who are coming up who understand this is that they've spent time studying themselves, right? Studying their emotions. And I will also try to point the gun to some religions here, because some religions don't understand the essence of emotions. So you see people preach about how it's a sin to have certain emotions. So it's a sin to be afraid, for example. It's a sin to be anxious and show some of these emotions. But even the Bible, and I think, talks about how you could be angry and sin not, right? And so that means that emotions are a normal part of being human. And they are not just reserved for the feminine gender. So because men need these emotions, they need to learn how to express the emotions effectively.
Yeah. So, all right, let's find the balance here. How can, men find the balance and not lose their masculinity?
So finding the balance has to do with, like I said, self-awareness, right? And a key critical part of self-awareness is introspection, being able to look inwards, right? But many times it starts from educating people, right? Fathers, for example, educating their sons that it's okay to cry, that it's okay to express certain emotions. So it starts with that, educating people, and then moving beyond, education, and then giving them the opportunity to express themselves, right? You cannot be male. And again, talking about the virtues of what religion preaches, if you don't even understand yourself.
Yep.
So you need to first know yourself to be able to even express who you really are. Because it's in the confusion of who am I that you then find people getting confused in that circle.
And going left, right without direction.
Exactly. In psychology, there's a critical part to this, which is called the age group of the adolescent child. The critical thing about that is that is the age where the adolescent or the person becomes aware of their own identity. And I think that's a critical stage where we begin to educate people of what this identity is all about. And it's not just about what the society preaches right now, because the society also needs to get a better orientation of what this is. And so if we're able to educate people, allow people to express themselves without the fear of being judged, I think we'll come to a point where we're able to get in touch with our masculinity and express it effectively.
All right, thank you, Chris, for all of that. We'll be taking a short break now. When we come back, we'll be looking at the role of faith. He mentioned religion in one of his answers. So we'll be looking at the role of faith, the role of religion in helping to form better men. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show. If you're just joining us, you've missed out on quite a lot in our discussion on masculinity. But don't worry, I'm going to tell you how you can catch up with all the parts you have missed very soon. So back to our discussion. Now we're going to be talking about the role of faith, the role of religion in raising strong men, in raising masculine men. I mean, in the last segment, you talked about how some religion sometimes frown on certain emotions, which then make, create toxic masculinity. Yeah, so how can the church, avoid all of this and help men become better?
I think first, religion is a strong factor in the way of life, in the culture of
After
people.
the government is religion.
Exactly. Somebody might differ with you, but generally, religion is a significant factor. And I think that it depends on the religion you're talking about. And if you're talking about Christianity as a religion, I think rooted in the core of Christianity is the place of self-control, is a place of empathy, is the place of looking after people, taking care of people. And these are the ingredients of what masculinity should actually be all about. I think there's a place in the Christian book that talks about being able to love, one another, love your neighbor. And these are the essence of the core aspects of masculinity.
Can a man go about self-introspection with the thought in his mind of becoming a better man?
Ask the right questions, right? I think that's the first place to start.
Okay, so what
right?
are the right questions?
I think that the male gender should learn how to ask the right questions. And when you say what are the right questions, for example, why do I feel what I feel, right? Because I think what we've done over the years is that when we feel these things, we attribute them to what we've been told. So I'm afraid. It's a sign of being a coward. So I don't want to feel that emotion. right? I want to be strong. I want to be brave. And so if we ask the right questions about what does it mean to be brave? What does it mean to be strong? Does being courageous mean you shouldn't have fear? Does being a strong man mean you should not feel emotions? So when you have those right questions, it then begins to guide you to understand what to do. And then this then comes down to, who am I, right? As a person, who am I? You need to get in touch with your own self and not just what people tell you that you should be. And so we are daring to know ourselves and to live to our full essence. I think that's what one of the things that Jesus, as a leader did. He was able to, get in tune with himself. And you would also see that a lot of people frowned against that sometimes. When he would show love to certain people, they would, oh, why are you doing this? It's just because he spent time introspecting, asking himself the right question. And I think there's a part in the Bible that talks about Jesus learning obedience through what he suffered.
Yes.
Right? We don't talk about this, and this is generally what we should be talking about. We should be helping people ask the right questions about what they feel, why they feel it, and what they can do about it.
Okay, so then how do we now go about saying we, because I'm a man also, I'm also learning from this discussion.
Yeah.
How do we go about now putting all of this into practice? I've asked the right questions. I've probably gotten my answers. Is it a step-by-step process?
Yeah.
Is it a one-time thing like, okay, I just press a button or something? How do we go about implementing this so we can actually see the change we're looking for?
So self-awareness and introspection, being a tool of self-awareness, is not a quick fix. Right? It's not a quick fix. So it's not something you do one day and that's it.
And that's it.
Right?
A lot of people have that misconception.
Yes, it's not something you do one day and that's it. It's something that you have to keep on doing. So it's creating a lifestyle out of this. That's what you need to come to understand. That little bricks, little steps would help you build what you're looking for eventually. And to say that also means to say that it is intentional. Right? It's very intentional. It just can't happen by chance. You have to be intentional about it. Even as a therapist, I have been intentional about understanding my emotions. Even though sometimes it's not convenient, it's not comfortable, but you need to create that time. So I think that, for men, we need to come to that point where we even identify a goal. Right? I want to get in touch with my emotions. I want to get in touch with being, with my masculine side. And I understand the advantages of this. And so what would this take for me? Right? What would this take for me? It's going to take a lot of learning. And of course, creating the opportunity to implement my learning. So from time to time, you would make mistakes. From time to time, and I notice you, even in this session, you had described men as being strong, right? And in my head, I'm like, women also are strong. But that also gives us the understanding that it takes time to come to that point where you come to understand that it's okay not to be okay. It's okay not to be strong at this point, right? It's okay to learn to be strong if I need to. It's okay to give up sometimes. It's okay to generally be open to growing. I think that's the word, right? It's okay to be open to growing, because whether it's masculinity or femininity, it's all about growth. And that's what we're called here to do.
That's what we're called here to do. Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. I sure learned a lot. All right, now it's time for our Saint of the Week.
Hey everyone, thank you Chima so much. Today the church celebrates a woman who was big on family life and was all for keeping them on the right path. So much so that she even prayed to God to take her family before they got corrupted. And the Lord answered her. We're talking about Saint Rita, the patron saint of widows and of the impossible. Her story is an interesting one. First of all, what interests me so much is her name. Rita is actually short for Margarita. So does that mean that every Rita is actually a Margarita? Moving on, Saint Rita or Margherita Lotti is an Italian saint who lived and died between 1381 and 1457. She lived for 71 years. After her baptism, it was evident that God had laid his hands upon her specially. Rita was baptized as a child, and after the rites were completed, a swarm of white bees went in and out of her mouth without hurting her. Amazing, right? It even gets better. Well, started off was because she was made a child bride and mother all before the age of 12, and she suffered at the hands of her husband. But like the godsend that she was, the young Rita was able to change him, only that it was too late as his acts caught up with him, leading to his death at the hands of a betrayer. There was a lot she had to deal with after that, from trying to stop a cycle of revenge over her husband's death to raising two very angry young boys, not to become taken in by her husband's family's quest for revenge. That was when she prayed that quite disturbing but honest prayer to God to take her boys so their souls would not get tainted further, and God did that. Imagine loving your family so much that you rather they return to their maker than see them suffer for their sins. Bold. Rita became a nun later in life, and the rest, as they say, is history. She lived a life of prayer, of devotion, and of miracles, as she was responsible for a lot of them just by being unwavering in her faith and her devotion to the saints in heaven. Now she's a saint too, after being beatified by Pope Urban VIII in 1627 and canonized by Pope Leo XII on May 24, 1900. When you have a family challenge, the hack is to invite Saint Rita into the situation, and you'll marvel at the wonders the Lord will work through her intercession. Over to you, Chima.
And that was our Saint of the Week. I'm very sure you have been intrigued by that story. Now it's time to go to the Know Your Faith team for today's episode of the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Know Your Faith series. I'm Collins, and as you can see, I'm smiling because today's topic is something that I think is very funny because I don't know when you think about it really. On today's episode, we'll be talking about the depiction of Jesus. Is Jesus black? You know, some people say I'm praying to black Jesus. And can we depict Jesus in different ethnicities through art? Now, most of us have watched movies like The Passion of Christ and a couple of others where we see Jesus depicted as a white man. And I've also had conversations with people about these movies. Some of them ask questions like, if Jesus is really a white man, as we see in the movies, then how am I as a black person supposed to expect that my prayers will be answered? I mean, he has long hair and I have afro. There's literally nothing we have in common. So how am I sure that he's like me and that he really understands what I am going through? So on today's episode, we'll be really talking about this. The first thing that we really have to understand is that despite the fact that this is what we see, the depiction of Jesus being, a white man through movies and all that, there are certain differences or things that we really need to understand as to why this is so. The first is that art is an expression of freedom. In the early years of our history, the Catholic Church struggled with the question, should Jesus Christ be depicted through art? So this led to what is now known as the iconoclastic controversy of the 8th century. The fear was that depicting his humanity in art would diminish his divinity, and capturing his divinity would leave out the fact that he became flesh and blood like us. The Second Council of Nicene affirmed the legitimacy of images, paving the way for artists to depict Jesus Christ in art. Art is an expression of freedom, and Christian art shows us what theologians and Christian thinkers struggle to explain with words. Another point is that Jesus is first true God and true man. A fundamental teaching of the church is that Jesus Christ is the Word of God made flesh. The focus is always to show that God became a man in Jesus Christ. Portrayals of Jesus in paintings have tended to follow the artistic conventions of the time or the reflection of contemporary theological developments. Now, this is not bad in itself. Popular portrayals of Jesus are often about his birth, his death, his ministry, and his mother. In our appreciation of work of art, our attention and devotion must first be turned towards Christ, who became human for our salvation. Worthy of note is also that Jesus came to identify with every race and nationality. The 4th century bishop, Gregory of Nyssa, wrote regarding the image of God that it dwells within every one of us, ignored and forgotten. We can imagine Gregory of Nyssa having something quite profound to say on the way in which the image of God is both ignored and forgotten by those who suffer persecution for reasons of faith and color, and those who are killed because they oppose oppressive leadership. Those who perpetrate such evil either do not have a concept of God, or they have conception of Him as something different from the humanity and attributes of those they oppress. Art has the responsibility of drawing attention to the fact that Jesus was born. He lived, He died and rose again to show us that we too, in our different ethnicities, possess the same dignity and power through Him, through our baptism in Him. Another thing to note is that it is offensive and even sinful to use one ethnicity's depiction to subjugate others. Now, some people falsely believe that Jesus Christ is white. They arrived at the conclusion from view of work of art that portray Jesus as white. This is historically correct. Some go far to say that since Jesus is white, He does not identify with other people of other ethnicities. So such views create tension and can lead to the denial of the dignity of anyone who does not look white. Some have blamed racial profiling and attacks on this way of thinking, and there is some truth to it. Some others have called for cancellation of portrayals of Jesus as white as a result. The problem is not the image as much as the tendency in us to promote a single narrative to the exclusion of others. We should promote images of Jesus as enculturated into the cultures in which He now lives. Jesus is alive in every person, and we ought to see and serve Him in one another. We need to see Him especially in the poor, the sick, and the marginalized. Finally, Jesus is for everyone. When Jesus took our humanity, He chose to be born in Israel. Jesus is not black. It helps to know what people from the area look like today, and also what they looked like probably, in the first century. But images of Jesus need to be enculturated into every culture, because God came not simply as a Galilean, but He took on our humanity so that everyone can identify with Him as He wishes to save us all. So when someone asks the question, how can I relate with a white Jesus when I am black? I simply ask, how do you describe Jesus to a blind man, to a person who cannot see color? Would you be more concerned about how long his hair is or how white his face is? Will those be the first features you use to describe him? With all you know as a Christian, art should lead us to a better appreciation of what God in Jesus Christ has come to do for us in choosing to save us from sin and death. A depiction of Jesus as a black man should only serve to help you know that Jesus sees you and He loves you just as you are. So the next time you're wondering whether you can pray to white Jesus or black Jesus, you need to understand that these are not things that you should really be concerned about, but you should know that He loves you just the way you are. So that's it for today's episode. I really, really hope that you've been able to take one or two things. Share, subscribe to our channel on YouTube at Dominican Media Presents. And until I come your way next time, be bold and be Catholic.
Thank you to the Know Your Faith team for that wonderful one. I hope you've learned a lot about what they had to share with you. In case you want more discussions on it, you can always leave a comment and we'll get to all of those comments and answer your questions. And with that, we've come officially to the end of Catholic Faith Forum for today. Thank you so much for sticking with us up to this point in time. As a young man, I learned a lot from this discussion with our guest, Chris Abojei. Thank you once again for gracing us with your presence and sharing your insights on this topic.
It's a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure having you. If you would like to support the show, please visit the website showing on your screen right now. You can also send an email or call the phone numbers showing on your screen right now. Once again, thank you for being with us on this episode of the show. And until we come your way with another beautiful episode, keep being saints in jeans and shirts.